The battle ended in defeat for the Muslims, but there is no clear data on casualties. Muslim sources believe that both sides lost many men. The Crusaders were victorious, but it was never a decisive victory. Saladin managed to regroup his army. The Crusaders had lost many horses, which meant that their cavalry force was even smaller. Replacing them was not an easy task. The Battle of Arsuf was an important battle. Saladin lost the lands on the coast of Palestine. It was a testament to Richard's command and to the fact that the Crusaders were not a disorganized mob, but a brave and disciplined army that listened to commands. In contrast, this battle was a black mark on Saladin's reputation as a commander. Richard then marched with his army along the coast to Jaffa and captured the fortress. Saladin had lost all of his land on the coast of Palestine, and its return to the Crusaders posed a more serious threat to Jerusalem. Richard retreated to Jaffa. He expanded the positions in the fortress and made it his general camp. The Crusader army was exhausted and needed to rest for a while. Saladin made good use of the period when the Crusader army was waiting in Jaffa. He reinforced the walls and other defenses of Jerusalem. He decided to take precautions against the possibility that the Crusaders would march on Ascalon and cut the road from Egypt, which Saladin was constantly using to reinforce his troops. He moved his army from Ramla to Ascalon and had the rich city and its fortress methodically destroyed and rendered uninhabitable. If Ascalon fell into the hands of the Crusaders, it would be impossible for the Muslims to receive reinforcements from Egypt. On the other hand, Richard faced constant problems. His army based in Jaffa began to lose discipline as supplies arrived by ship across the Mediterranean and alcoholic beverages and other forms of entertainment became available. Cyprus was becoming ungovernable. Richard found the solution to the Cyprus problem by selling the island to the Knights Templar and handing over the administration of the island to them. In another attempt, he sent an envoy to negotiate peace with Saladin. Richard demanded the return of Jerusalem and the land around it up to the Jordan River, and the return of the true cross that the Crusaders had lost at the Battle of Hattin. But Saladin said, "Jerusalem is ours as much as it is yours. Our Prophet ascended to Miraj from there, and our Ummah will gather there on the Day of Judgment. Therefore, there is no question of abandoning Jerusalem. As for the land, you asked for the lands west of the Jordan River. That land has always belonged to us. You took advantage of the weakness of the Muslims and settled there. But as long as the war continues, we will not allow you to enjoy the places you seized. As for the cross, it is a trump card in our hands. If we get a significant concession in favor of Islam, then we can return it to you." November brought rains and bad sea conditions. Under these conditions, military operations were generally not possible. Saladin demobilized half of his army, sent it back to Egypt, and encamped the rest in Jerusalem. But Richard took advantage of this, and in mid-November, he began a major military campaign to Jerusalem. He marched on Ramla, which had been abandoned by Saladin's army. He captured the city and stayed there for 6 weeks. In Latrun, Richard celebrated Christmas. Then, on January the 3rd, he and his army reached the fortress of Beit Nuha, about 19 kilometers from Jerusalem. The Crusader soldiers, who did not know the terrain, welcomed this with great joy. But those who knew the weather and geography, especially the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitallers, said that it would be impossible to come down from the hills in the rain and mud and successfully attack Jerusalem in such bad weather conditions. It was also learned that Saladin's reinforcements from Egypt had arrived and were camped on one of the nearby hills, and that it was possible that they could be caught between 2 of his armies if the attack was started. Richard stayed in this position for 5 days and then, following the advice of those who knew the strategic situation well, decided to turn back. This was the closest Richard's army came to Jerusalem. Richard retreated with his army to the abandoned Ramla. He then planned to march through Ramla and Ibelin to Ascalon, which Saladin had destroyed. When Richard arrived in Ascalon with the Crusader army, he immediately ordered the rebuilding of the castle and the city that had been destroyed a few months earlier. Like Saladin, he understood the strategic importance of the city. For the next 4 months, Richard stayed in Ascalon and devoted his time to rebuilding it as the most protected fortress on the Palestinian coast. While Richard prepared himself and his army for this endeavor, Saladin made no offensive, and for this he was greatly criticized by some emirs. Historians attribute Saladin's relative inactivity to the fact that he wanted to give his army a period of rest. He was waiting for reinforcements to arrive from Mosul and Jazeera and believed that he could not launch a disciplined offensive with the restless emirs. They also cite the fact that he had learned through his spies that there was discord among the Crusaders and that they had major financial problems and that he did not want to reunite them by launching new offensives. In the meantime, multiplicity and disharmony began to emerge among the Crusaders. The Duke of Burgundy and some other important French commanders and soldiers abandoned Richard's army and moved to Acre. King Richard's patience was wearing thin with all these problems. The ship captains of the Republic of Pisa in the port of Acre and the ship captains of the Genoese Republic quarreled, and the Pisans attempted to occupy the city of Acre. Meanwhile, Saladin resorted to the strategy of harassing and intimidating the Crusaders by setting up ambushes with small units. As the battles of maneuver continued into the summer, Richard made clear his intention to retreat because he was about to lose his throne. The other Crusaders under his command wanted to attack Jerusalem, but attacking Jerusalem without securing the supply lines would have been suicidal. In July 1192, the Crusader army under Richard withdrew to the north of Palestine. Unable to take Jerusalem and exposed to attack on the coast, Saladin's army attacked the fortress of Jaffa, which had previously been the center of operations for the Crusader assault on Jerusalem, and after a 3-day siege, they captured the city and the fortress. A small number of defenders retreated to the citadel. This Muslim army had not forgotten that the Crusaders had brutally murdered all of the approximately 2,700 defenders and some 300 women and children who surrendered at the Siege of Acre. Saladin's army launched a revenge massacre against the Crusaders in Jaffa. They left no Crusader soldiers alive and took no prisoners. Saladin Ayyubi tried to prevent this, but the soldiers lost control. It is said that Saladin then sent word to the defending Crusaders to retreat to the citadel and defend themselves. When King Richard heard of the attack on Jaffa, he loaded his army's knights in armor and Italian archers from Pisa and Genoa onto ships anchored along the coast to the north and hurried to Jaffa. On July the 31st, Richard disembarked with 55 knights in armor, several hundred infantrymen, and some 2,000 bow-wielding Genoese and Pisa soldiers, and attacked the fortress. On the same day, the city fell back to the Crusaders. The Muslim soldiers who had captured Jaffa and defended the fortress against Richard's attack were able to flee the city. Saladin was only able to stop this flight about 10 kilometers from the fortress, and only then he was able to reorganize his army. Saladin received word that Crusader reinforcements were coming to defend Jaffa. They took immediate action and attacked the city early the next morning. On August the 5th, Saladin's lightly armored Egyptian cavalry units suffered heavy casualties as they charged into the city. Some Muslim soldiers managed to enter the city, but Richard arrived with his own troops and forced the Muslim troops to withdraw. In the evening, Saladin recalled his army and began to retreat towards Jerusalem. The Battle of Jaffa ended in a victory for Richard, but he had no means of consolidating this victory as he had no reserves. Due to his extraordinary personal effort, Richard became exhausted and ill. He had to stay on his sickbed with a high fever immediately after the battle. By contrast, when Saladin returned to Jerusalem, fresh and trained troops, freshly arrived from Egypt and northern Syria, were waiting for him. Saladin could have continued the battle, but Richard's patience was running out. Not only was he exhausted, but reports from England indicated that his brother John had started a rebellion to seize the throne. Therefore, Richard wanted to conclude a peace treaty as soon as possible and return to England. However, the main point of contention in the negotiations between Saladin and Richard was Ascalon. Saladin would never give up Ascalon. Moreover, he imposed on Richard to dismantle the stones of the castle built in Ascalon one by one. Richard gave up all his other demands, but begged to at least keep Ascalon. When he received a negative response, he sent an ultimatum that he would have to spend the winter there. Saladin, on the other hand, knew that Richard was bluffing, that he was not here to stay, and that he had to make peace one way or the other. He said, "If you want to spend the winter 2 months away from your country and your family, go ahead. If you ask me, I can spend the winter and then the summer, then another winter and another summer here, because this is my hometown. I have one army for the summer and another army for the winter. I will sit and wait like this until Allah grants victory to one of us." Eventually, Richard gave up Ascalon and the Treaty of Ramla was signed. According to the agreement, the French would retain the coastal area from Tyre to Jaffa, but would accept Saladin's authority over the rest of the country. Ascalon would remain in Muslim hands, and the stones of the fortress would be removed one by one. Christians were also given free passage to Jerusalem. The Crusaders visited Jerusalem unarmed before leaving the Holy Land, but Richard did not join them. On September the 10th, Saladin demobilized his army, and a month later, Richard sailed with his army from Acre to England, bringing the Third Crusade to an end. The end of the Third Crusade satisfied neither Muslims nor Christians. Many Muslims were unhappy that Saladin had ceded the important southern coast of Palestine to the Christians who had usurped it, and that the Kingdom of Jerusalem based in Acre and the Count of Tripoli based in Tripoli still ruled there. Hattin ibn al-Shaddad, Saladin's personal secretary and biographer, reported that Saladin said, "I am afraid to make peace because I do not know what will happen to me. Our enemies will grow bigger and stronger because we have given them these lands. They will come back to recapture the lands they had abandoned before. I expect to see each of them wrapped and protected in their fortresses, from which they will proclaim, 'I will stay here,' and the Muslims will be devastated." These were his words, and then it happened exactly as he said. The Christians were also disheartened that Jerusalem had not fallen into Christian hands, and that most of the lands and fortresses that had been captured and seized in the First Crusade had not been returned to Christian hands, or even that the Muslims had not been completely eliminated and wiped out. This failure of the Third Crusade would lead to the launch of the Fourth Crusade 6 years after 1192. Saladin, who had been at the front for years, was tired and sick. His soldiers were also worn out. Shortly after the end of the Third Crusade, he died in Damascus on March 4th, 1193. At that time, khutbahs were read in his name in Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, southeast and northern Iraq. He was fluent in Kurdish, Arabic, Turkish and Persian. It is also said that he was a well-educated Hafiz. By destroying the Fatimids in Egypt, he ended the Shiite domination in the region and established a strong state organization. His second great achievement was conquering Jerusalem from the Crusaders and liberating many places held by the Crusaders. As a result, he was nicknamed the Conqueror of Jerusalem and became one of the most famous heroes of the Islamic world. Scholars and students came from all over the Islamic world to the madrasas he established in Egypt, and they wrote many scholarly works and turned Egypt into a center of knowledge by cleansing it from the Shiites. Ibn Shaddad describes his knowledge of history as very strong and his culture as broad. He was a follower of Nureddin Zengi in all matters, complementing the work he had begun, and did not even claim to have founded a new state. He kept his promises at all costs and loved to forgive. He was extremely generous, and it is narrated that when he died he had only 1 Egyptian dinar and 46 dirhams in his private treasury. Eastern and Western historians have always praised him, even the Crusaders admired him. May Allah have mercy on him.